Chapter 3, Trailblazing. They stopped by the store to stock up on picnic foods. On the way over to the hike, Chris even picked up a small bottle of wine for them, causing Lisa to give her a half-amused look. "What?" Chris asked, holding the bottle in his hand. "Aren't we going on the hike to relax?" "Well, we do need to make it back as well," Lisa said jokingly. "This isn't an overnight camping trip." "Okay, I'll put it back," Chris said, starting to put the bottle of wine back on the shelf. "Not so fast, Buster." Lisa punched him gently on the arm. "It's not like I actually said no to that wine." "Wine it is then." Chris agreed and put the wine in the shopping basket he was carrying on his arm. Stocked with food, water, sunscreen, and the small bottle of wine, they were content that they had everything they needed from the store and headed out to the trail. The trailhead was a 30-minute drive from town and was so small that Chris had to ask Lisa if she was sure they came to the right place. "It's the right place," Lisa smiled. "I like this place because there's no one else here, ever." Chris took in the surroundings. The pothole-riddled road they had followed brought them to a small gravel area that seemed to be a parking lot. From there, a small trail led out toward a ridge that rose up quite steeply at times. "So this is where we're going, I'm guessing?" Chris asked, pointing at the trail. "That's right," Lisa told him. "The trail leads up that ridge. It's a bit of a hike, but the views from up there are magnificent. There's also a natural spring there, and that's our real destination." They grabbed their packs from the car, put on sunscreen, and headed out. Compared to the previous night, Chris was more talkative, and Lisa found it enjoyable. During their trek up the ridge, she learned more about his family. He was an only child born to parents later in life. They thought they'd never be able to conceive, until at already 45, his mother found herself pregnant. He had been a loved child, adored by his parents. When he was in college, his parents had been killed in a car crash. His words grew more quiet, almost to a whisper when he spoke about burying them. He tried to hide it, but Lisa was almost sure she could see tears gleaming on his cheeks in the bright sunlight. He had found studying to be an excellent way to cope with the loss of his parents. Or maybe it had been more of a way to avoid dealing with it. Chris had buried himself in classes, books, anything he could find, to the detriment of his relationships as well. He found his friends try and reach out to him, but eventually they stopped calling. His then-girlfriend tried for months to be there for him, but he inadvertently pushed her away by burying himself in his studies. There was a bright side. He graduated with a master's degree in finance in the same time that his peers received their bachelors. He had even briefly begun to pursue his PhD, but the realities of living on academic grants reared their ugly heads soon thereafter, and he decided that making actual money from working felt much better. They had hiked for almost 2 hours before they took their first break. The sun had climbed high overhead, and the temperature was already in the high 70s. Chris barely seemed to be breaking a sweat, whereas Lisa felt sweat dripping down her back. Her shirt had wet spots around her back and her armpits. "How are you holding up?" Chris asked, taking measure of Lisa, clearly worried how she might be holding up. "We came up pretty fast, and some parts of that ridge are steep." "Huh, worry about yourself, number cruncher," she replied. "I may be older than you, but I still go for as long as you need." Chris cocked his eyebrow at her under his large glasses. She had to admit to herself that some parts of the trail she had worried for a bit on how she would do for this hike. She had always believed in exercising and keeping your body healthy, but over the last year, she had done much less of it than previously. Surprisingly, it had had very little impact on her stamina, and somehow she had kept her athletic figure. "You sure?" "I'm not sure I can carry you down." Lisa playfully punched him in the arm while getting up. "Come on, boy. The springs are probably only 30 minutes away. We'll do our picnic there." On the last stretch before getting to the spring, Lisa tried learning about Chris's work, however he spoke very briefly on the topic. The only thing Lisa learned is that he did accounting for a large family firm, but he had worked too much lately and wanted the day to be a real day off before he'd have to dive back in again. "I'm planning this to be my last project for the company," he told her just before they reached the spring. "They are in process of doing a merger, and I have to go over the last 10 years of finances to make sure it's all properly done so there won't be any issues with the deal. It's a massive amount of paperwork, and I told them it would take 6 months and they were okay with it. I am getting pretty bored with the work, so after the project is done, I'm going to quit. What are you going to do after that? Lisa asked. Chris shrugged his shoulders. I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Lisa decided to honor the young man's lack of interest in talking about his work and dropped the subject, and they spoke much less for the last stretch of the hike before the spring. As they reached the spring, Chris stopped. Oh, wow, he said, his hands on his hips. Told you it'd be worth it, Lisa told him, standing by him. The small spring rested between two rocky hills atop the ridge, surrounded by large old trees that provided some shade from the sun that beat down from a cloudless sky. The water was perfectly still and clear. An aura of stillness was evident everywhere. Sunlight through the trees gave an eerily beautiful green tint to the waters under them. Large, smooth rocks lined the spring, and Lisa and Chris sat down on one of them that had been warmed by the sun. After that hike, Chris told her that water seems very inviting, but on the other hand, I don't want to disturb the perfect stillness that this place has. Lisa reached over and grabbed a small pebble and threw it into the spring, sending ripples running across the tranquil surface of the water. There, she told Chris. It's no longer still. Now you can go in. Chris laughed at her, then got up and grabbed his pack. So where does one change here? He asked coyly. Lisa spread out her arms and waved them. Anywhere. There isn't another soul for miles, she told him. Chris looked around, looking for some cover, his expression shy. Lisa chuckled at him. Go anywhere behind my back. I promise I won't peek. He smiled a nervous smile at her, then walked off to some bushes behind her. A few moments later, he reemerged wearing swimming shorts. Lisa had to make a conscious effort not to gasp as the young man walked back to him. She knew he had been on his college swim team, but hadn't quite put one and one together on what that might mean for his body. The young man looked very strong, not over the top, but he had the unmistakable swimmer's physique, and had clearly since then taken great care of himself. His abs were distinctly visible. On his otherwise flat stomach, there didn't seem to be any extra flab on him anywhere. He had taken off his glasses, and his face looked totally different without them. It was still partially covered by his messy, curly hair, but what Lisa could see made her think of him in a very different light. She had to admit that she looked quite handsome. He walked up to her, standing on the rock where she was still sitting. Is the water as deep as it looks here? He asked, looking down in the water. It's actually very deep here, and she started to reply, but before she could finish, Chris dove into the water, sending a small spray of water on her. A few seconds later, his head came up from under the surface, his hair now plastered over his face. He smiled at her and brushed his hair away from his face. No longer covered by the messy hair, Lisa finally was able to see his face properly for the first time, and her breath stuck in her throat for a brief moment. Earlier, she had thought of him as quite handsome, but now realized that he was extremely so. She wondered why he kept his hair like that, and why would he wear those old glasses. It was like he was trying to hide himself. Before she could think more about it, Chris playfully sprayed her with the water. Aren't you going to come in? He teased, his hands poised to send a new spray of water on her, a mischievous look on his face. Well, what happens if I don't? She asked, returning his smile. I wonder what could happen, he replied, making a face as he would be pondering something very deeply, then proceeded to spray her with more water. She shrieked and laughed as the water hit her, climbing off the rock to get further away from the water. All right, she told him, but you need to promise to not sneak a peek while I change either. Scout's honor, Chris replied, holding up 3 fingers to his forehead. Lisa grabbed her pack and walked away from the rock to a group of bushes. She saw Chris swimming in the spring, facing away from her. She dug into the back and pulled out her swimsuit. When she pulled it out, insecurity filled her. In her rush in the morning, she had picked a 2-piece swimsuit. While not exceptionally revealing, the thought of wearing it in the presence of the young man in his perfect body made her very self-conscious. She knew she had a good body, but Chris was half his age. What would he think of her wearing a bikini? She was in her 50s. But she needed the swim. She was covered in sweat, and the water looked so welcoming. Deciding to not think about it anymore, she stripped down, making sure that Chris wasn't looking as she slipped off her underwear, then put on the dark red bikini. She walked back to the rock, using the balled-up clothes to cover her front as she did. Standing on the rock, still clothes in hand, Chris swam close to her, looking up. "What's wrong?" he asked, seeing her hesitation. She met his gaze for a brief moment, then looked out at the water silently. "Lisa?" She inhaled, putting the clothes down on the rock, and jumped into the water with him. The cool water took her in, the rush of it in her ears as she sank below the surface. A new kind of stillness enveloped her beneath the surface, which she savored for a second before breaking the surface again to tread water beside him. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking worried. She smiled meekly before speaking. "Promise you won't laugh?" "Of course," he told her, looking serious. "It's been a long time anyone's seen me in a bikini, and you're a 20-something swimmer, whereas I'm a 50-year-old widower. I'm feeling a little self-conscious, okay?" She was worried that despite his promise he would laugh at this, but his expression was gentle. "I understand," he told her. "It must be tough, especially after the last year. I could tell you that you have nothing to be self-conscious about, but telling people that they shouldn't feel the things they feel generally does nothing to alleviate it." "You're right. It's not like a light switch you can just turn on or off, but thank you for saying that. If nothing, it does put me at ease a little bit." "Glad to be of service," he replied. Chris decided to give Lisa space and glided away from her with graceful strokes, his body moving effortlessly across the water. Lisa followed him, the water gliding around her as she followed the young man. A few minutes later, they climbed out of the water and lay out the picnic blanket on a flat spot they found. Chris toweled himself off, then plopped down on the picnic blanket, taking in the rays of the sun. Lisa wrapped the towel around herself, and they proceeded to lay out their lunch. Chris pulled out the bottle of wine and opened it, pouring it for them. "Wine from a paper cup," Lisa remarked. "Very elegant." Chris raised his glass toward Lisa, and she clinked her paper cup against his. The wine tasted wonderful, and she could feel its heat in her belly. "This is a great spot," Chris told her, sipping from his cup. "It is. I love coming up here. I haven't been here in ages, though, and I wasn't 100% sure that the spring would still be here." "Well, that would have been an anticlimax then," Chris chuckled. "That dip in the cool water was exactly what I needed." "Agreed," Lisa said. "It's been a good day." They ate the small lunch they had brought. The day was getting hotter as the sun burned down from its peak, and Lisa started feeling uncomfortable inside the towel. She decided to ignore her hesitations and took off the towel, folding it to a small ball that she placed on the picnic blanket, then lay down with the towel under her head as a pillow. She could feel Chris's eyes on her, but as soon as she looked at him, he quickly averted his gaze, cheeks a bit red. "That looks like a good idea," he told her, grabbing his towel as well, and laying down next to her. Laying there, the hot rays of the sun on their bodies, Lisa felt young. Having the young man next to her made her heart beat faster than she would have admitted, and she longed to be able to admire his body. It had been a long time she had been in a situation like this. She closed her eyes, trying to remind herself that the young man was half her age, and was there just because he was renting the unit in her garage. The heat of the day, combined with a glass of wine, made her drift off. In that moment, it felt like the horrors that had been keeping for the last year were melting away. She woke up to Chris gently stroking her shoulder. He was kneeling beside her. Opening her eyes carefully, she looked up at him and smiled. "I dozed off there, didn't I?" she asked. "You did," Chris replied, taking his hand off her shoulder. "How long did I sleep?" "Just about half an hour. You looked so peaceful in your sleep, so I almost didn't have the heart to wake you up." She felt very peaceful. Everything was right. Her head buzzed pleasantly from the wine they'd had. The heat of the sun made her skin gleam with sweat. The heat had always made her feel more alive. Chris was still kneeling over her. She carefully placed her hand on Chris's knee, without thinking about it. He smiled and placed his hand over hers. Nothing was said in the moment, both just enjoying the moment in the silence of nature. Eventually, Chris took off his hand and got up. "Right," he said after a moment. "I guess we probably should pack up and start heading down to the car. It's a long hike back to the car." Lisa didn't want to leave. She wanted this moment last forever. She was not ready to give up this tranquility. She wanted to pull the young man down to the blanket next to her, pull him close. She desperately wanted to feel that closeness with someone. Reluctantly, she got up, stretching her arms high in the air. "You're right," she said. "Luckily, it's mostly downhill from here."